I'm quitting my job. You'll support us while I find myself, my sister texted. I replied, not my. That message hit me like a slap across the face. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual entitlement dripping from them. As if she was informing me of the weather, not demanding that I bankroll her and her boyfriend's lazy experiment at finding themselves. I stared at the glowing screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands, wondering how we'd gotten here. How had my sister, the girl I once shared bunk beds and whispered secrets with, turned into a woman who thought my paycheck was her lifeline? For years, I had brushed aside little comments, little requests, the constant expectation that I'd be the one to fix things. She was always the dreamer, the one with big ideas but no plan. And I was the steady one, the safe net. When she overspent, I helped. When she quit college, I covered her rent. When her last job fired her, I sent her grocery money. And every time, I told myself it was just this once. But as I read her text that day, something inside me shifted. My jaw tightened, my heart thudded in my chest. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't asking. She was telling. It was a demand dressed as a confession. And that was the moment I knew I couldn't play the role she had cast me in anymore. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen above the phone as though even touching it would somehow make her words more real. Anger rose up fast, but beneath it was something heavier, something that had been building inside me for years. A bone-deep exhaustion I had never admitted out loud. My sister had always known how to push me, how to wrap her demands in just enough drama and self-pity to make me feel guilty if I said no. It had been the story of our lives. She leapt without a parachute, and I was expected to catch her before she hit the ground. And for so long, I did. I was the one who covered her rent when she forgot about due dates, the one who sent her money for groceries when she claimed her paycheck was late, the one who quietly picked up the pieces after. Her impulsive choices left wreckage behind. She had turned my reliability into her safety net, and somewhere along the way, I let her. I thought back to last year when she woke up one morning and declared she was going to become an artist. Just like that. No preparation, no savings, no plan. She quit her part-time job the same week, smiling as if she had finally found her calling, and told me she just needed a little support until her work took off. I still remember standing in line at the art store with her, my credit card sliding through the reader while she piled brushes, paints, and canvases onto the counter. She was glowing, as if a whole new life was waiting for her, while I was silently calculating how much deeper into debt I was about to go. For 2 months, she half-heartedly painted in her garage, posting a few pictures on Instagram, chasing likes as though they could pay the bills. And then, just as quickly, she abandoned it all. The easel leaned in a corner, gathering dust. The paints hardened in their tubes, and she moved on to the next whim, talking about traveling, volunteering abroad, maybe starting a blog. None of it stuck. None of it ever did. And each time, she expected me to absorb the fallout. So when I read her message that day, I'm quitting my job, you'll support us while I find myself, it didn't feel like a request. It felt like an order, like she was announcing my new assignment in her life, as if my paycheck and stability existed solely to cushion her choices. It was the entitlement in her tone that cut deeper than the words themselves. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't even asking. She was assuming. My heart pounded in my chest, not from shock, but from recognition. This was the pattern, the cycle I had been trapped in for years. And suddenly, as I sat there staring at that glowing text, coffee growing cold in my hand, I realized something had shifted. The person she thought I was, the dependable older sister, the one who always came through, the one who let herself be drained, was gone. She just didn't know it yet. I kept reading the text over and over again, as though repetition would somehow change its meaning, but every time my eyes scanned the words, the same cold weight dropped into my stomach and pressed harder against my ribs. I thought about how many times I had let her shape my life around her whims, how many promotions I turned down at work because I was busy untangling her latest mess, how many vacations I canceled because she needed rent money or help moving or just a shoulder to cry on after burning yet another bridge she herself had set on fire. I thought about my credit card bills stacked in the drawer at home, the ones I never admitted to anyone, not even my closest friends. Because who would understand that a grown woman in her 30s was still bleeding herself dry for a sister who never once thought to pay her back? I thought about the birthdays where she gave me nothing, not even a card, but expected me to show up to hers with gifts and champagne and a smile, as though she were the queen of our family. I remembered the Thanksgiving when she announced at the table that she was quitting another job because it was toxic, and how our mother had looked at me and said, "Don't worry, honey, I'm sure your sister will figure it out," and then mouthed quietly, "You'll help her until she does." And how that expectation had been written into my role in the family so clearly that even when I wanted to say no, the word refused to form in my mouth. And yet, as I sat there with her message glowing in front of me, something finally snapped. Maybe it was because I had been working double shifts for months to pay down the debts she helped create. Maybe it was because I had sacrificed so much of myself that there was nothing left to give. Maybe it was simply because I was tired down to my bones. But in that moment, I realized I didn't owe her my stability, my sanity, or my future anymore. She could dress it up as self-discovery, or as a spiritual journey, or as chasing dreams, but I knew the truth. My sister wasn't finding herself. She was losing herself in comfort at my expense. And the worst part was, she thought I would never notice. But I did. And this time, I wasn't going to be the safety net, I wasn't going to be the ATM or the fixer or the fool, because when she wrote that line about quitting her job and having me carry her and her boyfriend until she floated into some vague version of happiness, she didn't realize she had finally crossed the one line I would never let her cross again: my freedom, my choice, my life. And when my fingers finally started moving across the screen, my reply was short and sharp and colder than she had ever seen from me. And even as I typed it, I felt a strange kind of relief sweep through my chest, like air rushing into a room that had been suffocating for years, because I knew this was the beginning of the end of her control over me. Her reply came within seconds, a wall of angry bubbles lighting up my phone as though she had been waiting with her thumbs poised, ready to attack. And when I saw the words, I almost laughed because it was the same tired script she had always used. First came the guilt, telling me I was heartless, selfish, ungrateful for family. Then came the dramatics, how she had sacrificed so much for me, though I racked my brain and couldn't think of a single example. Then came the threats, saying she would cut me off forever if I didn't support her, which was ironic considering she had never once supported me. Not emotionally, not financially, not in any sense that mattered. I read her words one by one, and instead of feeling the familiar pang of shame, I felt lighter, as though each insult was proof I had been right to finally put up a wall, because if her love depended on my bank account, then it wasn't love at all. I thought about the years she had leaned on me, the times she had sworn she would pay me back, or help me out once she was settled, and how those promises always vanished into thin air like smoke the moment she found a new distraction. I thought about her boyfriend, too, a man who never held a steady job and always managed to be lounging on the couch in every picture she sent, while I was the one hustling through late nights and early mornings just to keep the lights on. I pictured them together, scrolling through Netflix on my dime, eating takeout I had indirectly funded, while planning their next leap into the void under the banner of self-discovery. And I knew that if I gave in again, it would never stop. They would drain me until there was nothing left and then move on to someone else, or maybe just collapse expecting me to crawl under the wreckage and lift it off them like always. No, this time was different. I let her tirade fill the screen without interruption. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't justify myself. For once, I didn't need to, because the truth was simple and undeniable. I was done. And as I placed the phone face down on the table, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself, for breaking a cycle that had been strangling me for years, and the silence that followed was the loudest, most liberating sound I had ever heard. The silence didn't last long, because within an hour, my mother called, her voice sharp the way it always got whenever my sister was upset, and she said she couldn't believe I had spoken to family that way. That family meant helping one another through hard times, and didn't I remember all the ways my sister had struggled? I held the phone to my ear, staring at the wall as she spoke, and I realized she wasn't angry because she believed my sister deserved help. She was angry because for once I wasn't playing my part in the script. the role of the dependable one, the fixer, the provider. And if I stopped, then the whole system would collapse, because my sister's safety net wasn't just me, it was the idea that I would never walk away. I listened quietly as my mother listed all the times I had come through, as though reminding me of my past sacrifices would guilt me into continuing them, but instead it had the opposite effect. It felt like a ledger being read out loud. All the money, all the energy, all the time I had poured into someone who only saw me as a resource, not a sister. And when she finally paused to ask if I understood, I said, "Yes, I do." And my voice was calm in a way it had never been before. I said, "I understand that you both see me as a solution, not a person, and I can't live like that anymore." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, and then she said quietly, "I never thought you would turn your back on your own blood." And I told her, "I'm not turning my back. I'm just refusing to let you drain me anymore." And before she could respond, I hung up, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt free. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications, dozens of texts from my sister, half of them laced with venom, the other half dripping with fake sweetness, as if she couldn't decide which tactic would break me first. There were missed calls, too, from numbers I didn't recognize, likely her boyfriend borrowing phones to try and get through. When I scrolled further, I saw a long Facebook post she had written, vague enough not to mention my name, but pointed enough that everyone knew who she was talking about. She painted herself as the struggling dreamer, abandoned by her cold-hearted sister who refused to help in her time of need. And of course, the comments poured in. People saying, "Stay strong." Some offering her prayers, others saying families should always support each other. I felt the heat rise in my chest as I read the words. But then something shifted, because the people defending her didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the rent payments, the grocery deliveries, the credit card bills stacking up in my drawer, or the countless times I had saved her from her own messes. And I realized I didn't need them to know. I didn't need to justify myself to strangers or to anyone, because the only person I had to answer to was me. And I was finally okay with that. Still, it stung to see her twisting the story to make herself the victim. But this time, instead of rushing to defend myself, I let it sit. I closed the app, I turned off my phone, and I walked out into the sunlight, breathing air that felt fresher than it had in years, because I wasn't carrying her anymore. And deep down, I knew she would keep clawing and grasping for attention, for resources, for pity, but none of it would work, because for the first time she had to face her reflection. Without me propping it up, days turned into a week and the storm didn't quiet down. Instead, it escalated. My aunt sent me a carefully worded email saying she was concerned about the tension and asking if I could just be the bigger person and help my sister through this transition. My cousin texted me late at night saying he didn't want to get involved, but maybe I could just lend her a little until she was stable again. Even an old family friend messaged me on Instagram after reading my sister's dramatic post, asking why I was being so harsh. And I realized then that she had mobilized the entire family tree as if I were some kind of villain in her story. She was building an army of sympathy soldiers. But what none of them understood was that this wasn't about one request or one bad decision. It was about years, decades of me being drained until I was nothing more than the dependable backdrop to her chaos. I thought about explaining it all, laying out the receipts, the screenshots, the bank statements showing the thousands I had funneled her way, but then I stopped. Because the truth was, if they hadn't seen it already, they didn't want to see it. They wanted to believe her version, because it was easier than confronting the reality that she had been enabled her entire life. So I chose silence, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of strength. I stopped answering their calls, I muted the group chats, I didn't defend myself, not because I couldn't, but because I no longer needed to. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Every night when I went to bed, I thought about how many nights I had lost sleep worrying about her problems, and for the first time the weight wasn't on my chest anymore. It was gone, replaced with the slow, steady rhythm of freedom. And though I knew she would keep spinning her narrative, painting me as cruel or heartless or selfish, I also knew the truth, and the truth was enough. 2 weeks later, the fallout finally hit her in ways I had predicted but never voiced. She called me late at night, her voice cracking, not with anger this time, but with desperation. She said the landlord was threatening eviction because she hadn't paid rent in over a month. She said her boyfriend had taken some space, which I translated easily into he bailed when the money dried up. She said she didn't know what to do, and for a moment the old reflex inside me stirred, the one that wanted to rescue, the one that wanted to fix. But then I pictured my own stack of bills. I pictured the exhaustion in my eyes every time I looked in the mirror. I pictured all the years I had sacrificed myself for someone who never learned to stand on her own, and the reflex died quietly. I listened to her sobs. I listened to her pleading. But I didn't let myself be swept away this time. I told her calmly that she would figure it out, that she was an adult, that she had chosen this path, and she would have to walk it. And her silence on the other end of the line told me she had never once believed I would actually hold that boundary. She thought I would break like always, but I didn't. When she whispered, "You don't understand?" I answered, "No, I understand better than anyone. And that's why I'm done." When I hung up, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt clawing at me like before. Instead, I felt a strange, steady strength settling deep in my chest, and for the first time in my life, I knew she was going to have to face herself, without my hands holding her up. And though part of me mourned the sister I wished she had been, the bigger part of me knew this was the only way for me to reclaim my life, my peace, and my future. A month passed and the dust began to settle, but not in the way my sister had hoped, because reality had finally caught up to her in full. She was evicted from her apartment, her boyfriend vanished without a trace, and the friends who cheered her on when she posted about chasing her dreams suddenly stopped answering her calls when she couldn't pay her share of dinners or gas money. I heard bits and pieces through the family grapevine. My mother still tried to guilt me with updates, saying things like, "Your sister is staying on someone's couch, she's struggling, don't you feel bad?" But the truth was, I didn't. Not in the way she wanted me to, because what I felt was clarity. I had spent years bleeding for someone who never once thought about what I needed, who never once said thank you, who only knew how to take and demand and twist my love into obligation. And now that I had stepped back, I could see it all with brutal honesty. My sister wasn't a victim. She was the architect of her own downfall. And the only reason she had survived this long was because I had been the foundation holding up a house built on sand. Without me, the structure collapsed quickly. And while others shook their heads and called it tragedy, I called it inevitable. She sent me one last text in those weeks. It was short, no theatrics, just a single line saying, "I never thought you'd abandon me like this." And for a moment I stared at the words, feeling the old ache rise. But then I thought about every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar funneled into a void, and I knew the truth. I hadn't abandoned her. I had finally stopped abandoning myself. And when I closed that message without replying, I felt the final thread snap, the invisible cord that had tied me to her chaos for decades. And in its place came something unfamiliar, but deeply right. A silence that wasn't heavy or painful, but clean and freeing. The silence of choosing myself at last. In the months that followed, I began to notice how different life felt, without the constant shadow of her demands pressing down on me, and it was almost disorienting at first, because for so long my days had been shaped by what she needed, whether it was a frantic call about overdue rent, or a dramatic message about quitting yet another job, and now there was nothing, just quiet space that I didn't know what to do with. At first, I filled it with work, picking up projects I had once turned down because I had been too busy putting out her fires, and for the first time in years, I saw my own savings account grow. Instead of drain, I booked a trip for myself, something I hadn't done since my early 20s because I was always sending money away instead of spending it on myself. I took long walks after work, letting the evening air settle into my lungs without the buzz of my phone yanking me back into someone else's chaos. I began reconnecting with friends I had pushed aside because I was too exhausted from carrying my sister's problems, and when they asked why I had disappeared for so long, I told them the truth in pieces. and their faces shifted from confusion to understanding to a kind of protective anger on my behalf. One friend even said, "You've been living two lives, yours and hers. No wonder you were drowning," and hearing it said out loud made me realize how much I had normalized the weight I was under. I started therapy too, and week by week I untangled the pattern that had been set in motion since childhood, where my sister was the one who was shielded from consequences, and I was the one who absorbed them, where my mother's words about family being everything were really just code for "you are responsible for her." And it was only in that small, quiet office, with someone finally reflecting the truth back at me, that I began to believe I wasn't cruel or heartless. For stepping away, I was simply reclaiming the life that had been mine all along. There were still moments when the old guilt crept in, like when holidays came and I saw pictures online of my sister with new friends or staying on yet another couch, and I wondered if I had been too harsh. But then I would remind myself of the ledger, the years of sacrifice, the endless cycle of enabling, and I would breathe deep and let the guilt pass, because it was nothing compared to the freedom I felt now. Months later, when my sister reached out again, it wasn't with demands or theatrics. It was with a single line this time, asking if I could meet her for coffee. And for a moment, I considered it. But then I realized that even meeting on neutral ground would be an opening for her to slip back into my life with the same patterns, the same expectations. So I didn't respond, and instead, I closed my phone and sat in the sunlight with my own cup of coffee, savoring the warmth on my skin and the quiet in my mind. For once, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't living braced for impact, I was living for me. And the lesson etched itself into me so deeply that I knew I would never forget it. Family can love you and still drain you. Family can share your blood and still bleed you dry, and sometimes the bravest, most necessary act of love is the one you give to yourself by walking away. So when people asked me later if I regretted cutting her off, if I felt I had gone too far, I would smile softly and say no, because the truth is, I didn't abandon her. I simply stopped abandoning myself, and that choice, more than anything, is what saved my life.